Okay.
What was that story that you discussed where there was a company that was working with China, and China had bought a large stake in the company? It was about chips and AI.
Okay, I forget the exact name of the company, Jamie, but it's basically called the Heist of the Century. If you Google like Heist of the Century, China, semiconductors, I think it was called AML. It was a British semiconductor company. Any American or Western business is required to do business in China has to have a Chinese subsidiary. So essentially what happened is the Chinese subsidiary, I believe, of AML was stealing the technology from within it. And after they were reprimanded for something like this, the CEO of the Chinese subsidiary just said, nope, I'm taking it. He stole all of their IP, created an independent business backed by the Chinese government, and is now spinning up, based on their IP, semiconductors that were originally intellectual property of this British semiconductor company. And the reason that this matters is that is just the tip of the iceberg for IP theft that is happening with respect to China. It's one of the reasons why, if you look at Chinese or American businessmen who do business over there, they fully and readily admit the amount of IP that has just been straight up stolen through their fake legal process of this Chinese subsidiary. But really, it's just a farming operation. There's no such thing as private industry in China. You know, I talk about with TikTok all the time, the CEO, Zhang Zhiming, he actually was forced to pull one of ByteDance's apps from the Chinese App Store and apologize because it was not supporting, quote, socialist principles. He was like, I apologize to this is the CEO of TikTok today, the owner of TikTok. Everything there is totally controlled by the government. They're very savvy and they're very smart. And at this point, they've actually even reached a point where, in some cases, they don't even need our IP. In some areas, they are far more superior and advanced than we are. One of the ones that scares the shit out of me is electric vehicle batteries. So the entire EV battery supply chain is connected to China in some way. You've talked about the cobalt and all of that. And one of the things that Siddharth brought up on your show was that it's the Chinese companies that are working with these Congolese gangs. Chinese don't give a shit about labor. I mean, it's not like we give a shit either, so to be fair. But anyway, they're willing to come in and be like, look, we want the cobalt, give it to us. This is actually part of the reason why Elon is in a precarious position. A huge part of the Tesla EV battery supply chain is in China. Even here in the United States, a lot of the new EV battery plants that are being built, it's a Chinese subsidiary and a conglomerate that is behind that. And look, what did we come through with the whole pandemic? If you're going to have critical supplies being manufactured and connected to China in some way, they're always going to put their interest, as any country should, above your own. You need to have some sort of resilience. Like if we get into Taiwan is another example. TSMC, Taiwan semiconductor manufacturer, they are building a plant here in Arizona. They're building, I think it's $100 billion plant, which is great. I'm glad that they are, but it takes a decade to spin those things up. They create 92% of the world's most advanced chips. If we have a conflict in Taiwan, I always talk about this on the show, we are all turning this shit into the government so that they can create missiles and bombs. Like they will literally need to rip the semiconductors and chips out of our cell phones, out of our computers, because we're not going to have anything. Like 92% of the world's most advanced chips, everything goes dark. Like everything is turned over into some sort of ration thing. Chips is the new gold. It is one of the most precarious as an industry for the United States that we remain in. The CHIPS Act was a great step in the right direction that the Biden administration passed, but tip of the iceberg, man. I mean, that's a whole other level.
I mean, that is the, like, if we're looking for a more positive story, less like gloom and doom, the Biden administration has like dipped their toe in the water of industrial policy, recognizing that, I mean, the best response to China, the problem for us is being so interdependent where, you know, the pandemic, you come to realize like, oh, fuck, they make all the masks. Like, oh, shit, they make
vitamins,
all the like,
drugs,
all this.
Yeah.
And so there was, and then the other piece is we realized with these sprawling just-in-time supply chains that they were incredibly fragile, right? That if you have a disruption, your whole economy is like going to go to shit. You're going to have inflation. You're going to have all these backups at the ports and all this stuff. So they have dipped their toe in the water of having industrial policy that makes us more resilient, less reliant on these other countries, including the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot in it for bringing that like green energy production and EV battery production to our shores, and has requirements about like where those batteries are built and where the sourcing comes from. But it really is just starting to dip your toe in those waters ultimately.
We're more than a decade out. It's still so difficult. I mean, the sourcing on the EVs is such a nightmare. And if you're trying to get, Conflict Creek cobalt or lithium, right now there's a huge battle right now in South America, in Mexico, in Chile, and elsewhere where Chinese companies are trying to buy all of the lithium deposits, which of course you need for a lithium-ion battery. And if we also, look, this shit takes a long time. I think that's just the one thing I want people to, you don't just snap your fingers and build a semiconductor fab. You need water. If a single human hair gets into the TSMC facility, the whole thing shuts down. This is the most sophisticated manufacturing basically in the entire world, and we're trying to rebuild it overnight. It's very, very, very difficult. And then even if you think about from an infrastructure point of view, so we have an explosion right now in electric vehicles. I think that's great. I think EVs are really cool. They're really fun to drive. But if you don't have a Tesla, like where do you charge? If you're driving long range, like where are you going to charge it? It's not like we have a ton of EV battery stations.
We need the infrastructure.
Right. We
really
don't have
badly.
the same gas station infrastructure that we all have. We're decades behind on that. So anyway, I would love for the U.S. government to intelligently invest in it. And a lot of this is ideological. So another thing with the Inflation Reduction has a bullshit name. You should probably just called it like a clean energy bill, which probably would have polled better than a fake inflation reduction. Whatever.
That was Joe Manchin's innovation.
One of the important things is ideology, right? Which is not ideologically investing in technology because we want it to work, but because it actually works. Nuclear is a huge part of this conversation. We talked a ton about it on our show. For a long time, we had tax credits. Clean energy tax credits were only applicable to wind and solar. Wind and solar are fine. I think they have a lot of problems. Solar in particular is very filthy in order to manufacture. A lot of it is manufactured in China, and we actually rely on China to build.
You also need the batteries for it to be
Battery
sustainable
storage.
For when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. Yes.
It's complicated. Whereas nuclear has like a 93% rate at which it's always being able to run. It's actually even more powerful than natural gas, very reliable. Unfortunately, we haven't built a new nuclear power plant in the United States since 1974, which is insane, right? And, luckily, California decided not to totally lose its mind and close the Diablo nuclear power plant. Here in Texas, I think only 13% or whatever of our power comes from nuclear. We get more power from coal, I believe, here in Texas than we do from nuclear in the year 2023. It doesn't make any sense. The point is that even if we wanted to, though, and this is the fair criticism, it takes a long time. But with all of these things, no time like the present. Like, we got to start now.
Yeah.
The current system is not working.